Putin realizes that his war in Ukraine has been a strategic disaster for the country in terms of its isolation, the economic penalties, and for that matter, the deaths of certainly 200,000, if not more, Russian soldiers, and the wounding of double that. So it's been a clear disaster, even as Russia's made some tiny gains over the past several months. And
And
again, I'm sorry,
so,
please.
no, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, if the war in fact goes against him again, and I think we will see that, although not necessarily over the next 6 or so months, his own staying power will prove to be not that long.
Now, the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been inaugurated for a fifth term, nearly 25 years after he first took office. Putin won Russia's sham election back in March, securing an overwhelming majority, with most of his opponents either dead, jailed, or barred from running. UK and US envoys were not present at the ceremony after a decision was made to boycott it, which did not mean that the event was without pageantry. Well, John Herbst is director of the Eurasia Centre at the Atlantic Council and a former US ambassador to Ukraine and Uzbekistan, and joins us now. Good evening to you, John.
Good evening. Happy to be here.
For people who weren't able to see it, just tell us what was happening at this inauguration ceremony today.
It was luxurious, right? In this gilded hall, Putin comes in with the Russian soldiers with their chins way up and their rifles out, and a huge, um, holiday dressed crowd, suggesting again great luxury, and supposedly, the wealth and the strength of the nation, but really quite an image as opposed to a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. He was walking through these huge gilded doors of the Kremlin, plenty of ceremony there, and of course, yet another term in power. I mean, he is, despite what we saw, the brief revolt against his power, he does seem to be in an unassailable position.
I would hesitate to say that. I'm not predicting disorder tomorrow or even, a year from now. But the Prigozhin mutiny, right, which wasn't that long ago, was preceded by 8 or 9 months of very clear tension among people closest to him. And had Prigozhin decided not to turn back, if he had actually, marched his troops on Moscow, Lord knows what would have happened. And we all know that the election was rigged, that the 87% vote for Putin should not be taken at face value. And if in fact the war turns against him, and it really hasn't turned for him, I think Putin's staying power will prove to be not nearly what people suggest right now.
Of course, in recent weeks and months, Russian forces have actually been making some gains in Ukraine, haven't they?
There's no doubt that they have made incremental gains at extraordinary cost, and principally because of the 6 or nearly 7 month delay of American aid to Ukraine, which greatly magnified Russia's already large superiority in ammunition and weapons. But I suspect the gains Russia made, again, they weren't substantial, will start to diminish literally now. And maybe they'll make some small, even smaller incremental gains in the next 6 or 8 weeks, but probably not much beyond that.
And yet, of course, the Kremlin, President Putin, has ensured that all political opposition, all those voices who are opposed to the war, are pretty brutally suppressed, aren't they? It's interesting. I'm reading in the Times tonight reporting that Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, posted a video telling Russians, "Our country is being led by a liar, a thief, and a murderer, but this will definitely come to an end. Don't give up. Truth will prevail." But of course, it is so difficult, isn't it, for any opponents of President Putin to even utter such words as that?
Well, from abroad, it's eminently doable. Inside, no. And her husband decided to return to Russia, even though he knew he was to be arrested. Vladimir Karamurza, did the same thing, and he is in jail. We're all greatly worried about him because Putin realizes that his war in Ukraine has been a strategic disaster for the country in terms of its isolation, the economic penalties, and for that matter, the deaths of certainly 200,000, if not more, Russian soldiers, and the wounding of double that. So it's been a clear disaster, even as Russia's made some tiny gains over the past several months. And
And
again, I'm sorry,
so,
please.
no, sorry, carry on.
I was going to say, if the war in fact goes against him again, and I think we will see that, although not necessarily over the next 6 or so months, his own staying power will prove to be not that long.
Although you talked about the isolation of Russia, and of course, Russia is now subjected to many international sanctions. It does seem to have found ways of getting round much of that. Of even if it can't actually avoid the sanctions, then finding other countries that are prepared to supply what Russia needs, countries like China, India, and so on. I just wonder whether the efforts by the UK, the US, and others to isolate Russia have really been as effective as they might have been.
I think they have been effective. They have not been overwhelming, and there are efforts now to find ways to make them more effective. But yes, you're right. The Russians sell oil and natural gas to India and to China, but it reduced prices. And there's a lot of, I think, naive commentary on the Russian economy. They're talking about Russia having grown 3+% last year, but that's only because the IMF, for reasons I don't understand, have accepted as valid Kremlin-produced economic statistics.
Well, I guess it's very difficult to get independent statistics out of Russia, just as it's very difficult to get really accurate senses of where public opinion is, because those opinion polls that we do see still suggest that Putin has overwhelming support.
You're absolutely right on both counts. Regarding public opinion, just keep in mind the Russian people are not stupid. They know what the government wants them to say. And when a stranger calls them on the phone and asks them a fraught political question, do you think they're going to give an honest answer if they think the government will like it? And as for economic statistics, you're right. There isn't a clear set, an easy set, easily available set of real statistics. But back in Soviet period in the 80s, the CIA was producing analyses based upon their sense of where the Russian economy was, and which was far less rosy than the statistics being used by economists across the United States and the West.